Sarah, who should have been here to read it, you're still missed. In the search for my missing wife, I had ended up in a house full of cannibals and barely escaped. I had found some of Becky's belongings thrown into a closet in the house, but she was no longer there. That closet was where they threw their victims' belongings after they had been killed. It was very unlikely that Becky had made it out of the house alive. During the struggle that took place in the house, my foot had been broken so bad that I ended up in a wheelchair. 2 weeks after the escape, I was making my public speaking debut as Mr. O'Lantern on a local news program. In the middle of the program, 2 police officers had walked in and placed me under arrest. My hands were cuffed to the wheelchair, and one of the cops began pushing me toward the studio door. A couple of the news crew looked like they were starting to panic. I assured them everything was going to be okay. I hoped I sounded more confident than I felt. "Can I ask what this is about?" I asked as we got outside the studio. "We'll ask the questions," the officer who was pushing my wheelchair told me. I hadn't heard him speak before that, and his voice was raspy. He looked at his partner, who nodded. We were almost to the front door of the building. "I have a right to know," I told him. "In our custody," the one in front of me told me as he pushed open the door, "you have no rights. Now stay still and shut up." What I was seeing and what they were saying clicked as I was wheeled outside. There was no police car, only a maintenance van. "You're not cops." "The pumpkin is not a total idiot," one of the fake cops said to the other one. The one pushing my chair wheeled me up behind the van, while the other one opened up the cargo door. Together they picked up the wheelchair and hurled it into the back of the van. They closed the doors so quickly that my cape caught in them. I landed face first on the carpet that lined the back of the van, and the chair landed on top of me. I tried to push it off, but I was still cuffed to it. My foot throbbed, and the rest of my body ached from being tossed. There was a solid barrier between me and the cab, so I didn't see the 2 men get into the van. I heard both front doors open and close, and then the engine started. Their reckless driving tossed me and my wheelchair all over the back of the van. By the time we finally came to a stop and the engine shut off, I thought I might have a concussion. "Time to get you out of there, pumpkin," the raspy voice said to me as he opened the cargo door of the van again. He was taller and thinner than the other man, but with more muscle. I sensed that he wasn't the one in charge of this operation. He began by pulling my chair by its wheels, and I was dragged across the carpet in the van's interior. He made no effort to be careful as he put me down in a parking lot full of cracks and potholes. The chair shook violently as he pushed me toward a building that appeared to be abandoned. The front door of the building creaked as the shorter of the police imposters opened it. I was led through the doorway into a dark and dusty hallway. Still cuffed to the chair, I was pushed into a room that looked like it might have been a hospital room 100 years ago. Without saying anything, the taller man held me down while the other one unlocked the cuffs binding my arms. They then worked together to lift me onto an ancient hospital bed, cuffed my arms to the rails, and tied my legs down. My broken foot throbbed as they made sure the rope was tight. "Here's the deal, O'Lantern," the shorter of the men said. "If you cooperate and tell us what we want to know, this will be much easier on you. If you don't, your death will be slow and painful. The choice is yours. Now, how did you get out of the Pretius house?" "Through the door," I told him. He chuckled, but it wasn't an amused chuckle. "Corbin, do you want to show our friend what happens when he doesn't cooperate?" The tall man with the raspy voice reached back and used all of his strength to bring his fist down on my face. With my limbs tightly secured to the bed, there was nothing I could do to defend myself from the blow. I felt my nose break, and a warm trickle of blood ran down my cheek. "Let's try again," the man who wasn't Corbin said. "Tell me about the house." 1 floor, I told him, several hallways, and a lot of locked doors, a little on the creepy side. You think you're really cute, don't you? Jack-o'-lantern, Corbin questioned. More like jackass-o'-lantern. Once again, I found myself on the receiving end of a punch thrown by the muscular man standing over my bed. Blood ran into my eyes. Corbin turned to the other man and said, "Enough of this, Alex. Let's get to the fun stuff." Somehow, I had the idea that anything Corbin classified as fun stuff was not something I was going to enjoy. I was right. "One more time, O-Lantern," Alex warned me. "You mouth off one more time and I will personally guarantee that your final moments are excruciating." "Here's what you don't understand, Alex." "Is it Alex?" They both seemed somewhat put off by how calm my voice was. "There is nothing you can do to me. My wife is dead, possibly after having an affair. I've become someone that has to hide who I am, and I can't even avenge my wife's death. Her murder. To be honest, I hope these are my final moments." "Bravery," Alex whispered, bringing his face within inches of mine. "Admirable." He then turned his attention back to Corbin and said out loud, "You heard the man. He's ready. Hook him up." Corbin opened a closet door and rolled a large machine out of it. It looked like some kind of medical monitor, but I suspected it wasn't. Once again, my keen intuition skills were right on track. "This is just like a machine you use to jumpstart your car," Alex said. He spoke while Corbin moved the machine toward an outlet. "It has been modified to allow electricity to flow easily through a human body. The cuffs you're about to be fitted with are lined with electric conductors. When the power gets high enough, it will, of course, stop your heart. We will increase the power every time you are uncooperative." As he finished speaking, Corbin began fitting my arms and legs with what looked like blood pressure cuffs. He was careful to make sure they each made direct contact with my skin, as this would allow the electricity to flow through me more freely. I felt the cold metal ring inside each one of them. "Now," Alex said, growing more impatient with every passing second, "the Prettiest House. What happened at the Prettiest House?" I waited for what seemed like a very long time as his gaze met my eyes, unblinking. "Becky died," I finally told him. "That's what happened at the Prettiest House. Becky and countless others. I have no idea how many. I should have figured it out sooner. Maybe I could have." I almost missed it while I was talking. Alex had given the smallest of nods, but Corbin saw it and flipped a switch on the machine. My words transformed into painful screams as the first jolt of electricity shot through my body. "Maybe a little more power will change your mind," Alex tried again. "Do you want to tell us what happened now?" "Go ahead and kill me," I insisted. "I'm not telling you anything." This time, Corbin didn't wait for Alex to tell him. He twisted a dial on the machine and flipped the switch again. An even more pitiful scream escaped me, and my body shook violently and uncontrollably. When he finished with the machine, he reached up and brought another punch down just to the left of my left eye. I blacked out. My eyes opened slowly, and everything around me was blurry. I was surrounded by bright colors, which contrasted where I had blacked out. My brain was still fuzzy, but perhaps I had been moved to a hospital. Who would have found me in time? "Mr. Geist," a female voice whispered. My vision was starting to clear up, but my brain became fuzzier as it happened. I still couldn't see who she was. "Are you awake, Mr. Geist? There's some things we need to talk about." The voice sounded familiar. I still couldn't place it, so I just grunted. "Take your time," she said. It was at this point I realized who she was. My vision was clear now, and I was looking directly into the face of Susan, who ran Mortem House. Mortem House, because there's no better way to explain it, is like a giant apartment complex for dead people. According to Susan, I was the only living person who had ever seen it. I had no idea what I was doing here now, though. As all of this ran through my mind, I felt my memories slipping away like a dream from which I had just awoken. I was laying on a couch in a room I had never seen before. I was still wearing my old lantern outfit, cape and all, but it was no longer torn and bloody. Now that my mind was almost completely blank, I began to panic. What the hell is going on? This can be shocking at first, the lady told me, especially in someone so young. You're not expecting it. I don't want to rush you, but when you're ready, we should really start the admissions process. You are, of course, welcome to stay here in the welcome room as long as you need. I'm sorry, Jack. She touched my hand. You know, there are worse things that can happen to you than death. I can't be dead, I insisted. I don't feel dead. Death is not like everyone thinks it is, she explained. You should know that better than anyone. However, you're not technically dead yet. We don't always get advance warning like this. When we do, we like to get as much of the admissions paperwork filled out as we can. That way, at your time of death, you'll have faster access to the amenities here. What makes you so sure I'm going to die so soon? I was desperately clinging to nothing, and by then I knew it. It also occurred to me that I barely had any memories of my life, and the ones I had were still fading. Was that a normal part of the dying process? Your body has sustained serious trauma, she told me, pulling a tablet from the table in front of her that showed vital signs. My name was at the bottom of the screen. I looked at my body, but saw no signs of trauma. Your heart rate is slowing and your brain function is decreasing. You're already unconscious. It's just a waiting game now. Doctors, I said, still grasping at straws, is there not any chance I could be saved? You're in an abandoned hospital surrounded by nothing for 30 miles, she explained. Her tone was that of someone trying to explain that fire was hot. No one is going to find you in time. Why can't I remember any details about who I am? I asked. The intensity of my panic increased as that reality set in. That's completely natural at this point, she assured me. Your body is still fighting for life, and your mind has not yet accepted what is happening. We often see that in people who are transitioning, but have not actually died yet. As part of the admissions process, you'll be shown the highlights of your life. You'll have a copy of the film to keep if you want. This is a lot to take in, I told her. I was beginning to calm down some, but I still didn't understand how this had happened. I'll be right here with you every step of the way, she promised. Jack, you're the only person since I've been running the Mortem House that I got to meet before they died. You're a good person, a strong person. And even in death, you will be okay, once you remember who you are. She put a hand on my shoulder to comfort me, and used the other hand to give me a small black device. I'll be waiting when you're ready to start with paperwork. Just hit that button. As she got up and left the room, I studied the device. It had one silver button on it and a sticker on one side that declared it property of Mortem House. I considered everything I had been told in the last few minutes. Could this really be what death was like? There were so many different ideas about what happened to us after we died, but I had never heard anything like this. The lady, Susan, my brain wanted to call her, had said I could stay in this room as long as I wanted. What would happen if I never pushed the button? She might come back angry after a few hours. Even worse, she might never come back. I could be in here forever as a solitary prisoner. Another panic struck my mind as that thought occurred to me. I began frantically pushing the button over and over. After about a minute, it felt like an hour, the lady came back through the door. "If you're ready," she said in a sweet voice, "we can go ahead and get started. Follow me." She motioned for me to go through the door. She led me through a waiting room that looked vaguely familiar. Could I have been in there before, or did it remind me of another waiting room? There was a reception window, but no one was there. She led me past the window and into a narrow hallway. A series of doors felt intimidating, but I felt like mainly because I was somewhere I didn't recognize. "The second door on your right is Ari's office," the lady told me. "You can go right on in, and Ari will get you started with admissions. After that, we'll show you your life film and go from there." The second door on the right was open, but I knocked on it anyway. I was told to come in, so I did. Ari turned out to be a beautiful red-headed lady in her late 20s. She smiled as I walked in. "Jack!" "Yes, ma'am." She looked over her glasses at me. Something about her relaxed me a little, so I said, "You're a little young to be dead, aren't you?" "You're only a few years older than I am," she pointed out. "I'm not technically dead yet." "Well played," she replied. "Are we flirting?" This was an odd question. I was, according to them, dying, and sitting here filling out paperwork to enter an afterlife village of some sort. Flirting with a beautiful redhead is an odd thing to do when you're dying. The question caught me off guard, so I just said, "I think so." She seemed to pick up on my discomfort and snapped almost instantly into business mode. "The initial paperwork is just the main points of your death. Since your memory has not started recovering yet, we can go directly into your life film after that and fill out the rest later." "Sounds like a plan," I said. There was still a smile under her businesslike demeanor. Had we met before? She seemed oddly familiar. "Your name is Jack Geist," she started, reading off a page she had just pulled from a file. "You were born October 9th, 1985, and barring something unforeseen, your date of death will be November 12th, 2016. Your death is being ruled a homicide and was caused by trauma to the head. This is in no way connected to any police report or judge ruling conducted by people who are still living. If this page sounds correct, sign at the bottom of the page." While she was talking, she slid the paper across the desk to me and handed me a pen. I signed the page and slid it back over to her. She put it back in the file and told me, "The screening room for your life film is right down the hall. I can show you if you'd like." "Please," I said, and she got up from her chair and walked around the desk. She stood at the door and gestured for me to go through it. I did. "I believe your screening tech is going to be Edward Sellers," she said as we made our way down the hall. "And your film will be hosted by Theo Beck." We had made it down the hallway at this point, and I saw a door that said "Screening Room" in small black letters. "You can go on in and have a seat. Edward will be with you momentarily." I walked through the door, and was almost instantly disappointed. I had expected a large theater-style screen, but there wasn't so much as a television. What were they going to show the film on? The room was, in fact, bare, except for one chair in the center. The room was not much bigger than a closet. The chair looked semi-comfortable, but there were restraints on it. I decided to not sit down. An older man, perhaps around 70, came in a few minutes later. He had a sour look on his face, as though he would rather be anywhere other than here in this screening room with me. I felt like screening room was too fancy a title for this space. He looked at me, then at the chair, and barked, "Sit down." I did as I was told, and he began fastening the restraints on the chair. I felt like a prisoner, and worse, a prisoner who was about to be executed. While the man was working, he said, "My name is Edward Sellers. I'm your screening tech. If you cooperate, this will be easier for both of us." Another man walked into the room, a little younger than Edward, and I was not comforted by the fact that he seemed unsurprised to see Edward restraining me to the chair. He walked in and said, "My name is Theo Beck. I'll be hosting your screening of your life film today, and I welcome you to Mortem House. I hate to see people show up here who are so young. I imagine you're probably pretty confused about now, is that right?" "Am I being held prisoner?" I asked. "Actually," Theo said, "the restraints are for your protection. People have been known to get so immersed in the film that they go into a trance-like state and hurt themselves." He looked at Edward and said, "Try to be a little more friendly, Eddie." I couldn't imagine getting so immersed in any film that a person might forget where they were, no matter what was on it. I still didn't know what they were going to show it on, since there was no screen of any kind here. Maybe they would bring in another tablet, but I thought that would eliminate the point of having a screening room. Edward left the room, and Theo started going over something on a clipboard he was holding. He didn't say anything for several minutes, and tension built in the room. After a few minutes, Edward came back, and he was now holding a helmet with wires coming off of it. "Your life film will show you the important moments in your life," Theo started. My memories began flooding back all at once while he was talking. "These are good moments and bad moments that influenced your life. I was in the house of cannibals, caged with the other prisoners. There may be some of them you don't remember." I could see Ari's face in the cage. The problem was that Ari hadn't been in the cage. Edward had begun placing the helmet on my head and hooking wires into the back of my neck with needles. I felt a sharp jab as each one went in. I was assured that stabs were harmless. When Edward was almost half done, Theo began explaining the way the helmet worked. "The helmet will draw memories out of your own brain," he told me. "It can go deeper than surface memories, so you don't have to be able to consciously recall something for the helmet to find it. The memories will be fed back into your brain, and the helmet will show you the visuals that go with them. You're going to feel like you're living those moments again. You'll be able to feel pain, you'll be able to smell, taste, and use all of your other senses. Whenever you're ready, nod your head to begin." I nodded my head and was surrounded by darkness. For the briefest of moments, I thought something had malfunctioned. Then I saw something coming at me from far away. As it got closer and appeared to be bigger, I saw that it was yellow text, but I couldn't read it yet. As it got closer still, I was able to make out October 9th, 1985. The words faded away, and I saw a hospital room. The woman in the bed had the same eyes as me, and must have been my mother. I didn't remember a lot about my mother, because she had disappeared when I was 8. I assumed that the baby in her arms had to be me. My dad stood by the bed, but he looked quite a bit younger than he had at his time of death. Time will do that to people, I suppose. "We'll name him Jack, after your father," my dad said. My mom smiled, turning to me. "We both love you very much, little Jack." The scene faded, and I found myself in a variety of other scenes. I saw my first day of school, my first kiss, my first breakup, my graduation, and the day I met Becky. Before I knew it, I found myself sitting next to my dad in a small room. I told him, "I'm really nervous." "Of course you're nervous," he said. "Would be unnatural if you weren't." "Why should I be this nervous if I know that I love her?" I asked him. "Because you're getting married," he said with a smile. "You're supposed to be nervous. In a few minutes, you're going to see her walking down the aisle, and you'll wonder why you were ever nervous at all. Live in the moment and let yourself feel everything." "Thanks, Dad," I said, and I hugged him. The wedding went perfect, and at the end of it, I felt happier than I ever remember feeling. As I kissed her, the scene changed again. I was in a hospital room again, but this time it was Dad in the bed. I was holding his hand, and he said, "You know I haven't got much longer, Jack. I need you to promise me something before you go." "Don't ask me to move on," I stuttered through tears. I don't want to lose you. You've always been my rock, Dad." "I still will be," he said, tears now streaming from his eyes as well. "It's okay for you to mourn, son, for a little while. Then your life will move on, and that's okay. You have big things in front of you, and you can't let my death be the reason they don't come to pass. This is natural, and I will always be with you, right here." He raised his free hand and put it on my chest. It quickly fell back to the bed, his other hand went limp, and the monitor he was attached to began sounding an alarm. 3 doctors rushed into the room, and 2 of them began pushing buttons on the machine. After a few minutes, they looked back at the 3rd doctor, who was a little older. 109, the older doctor said after looking at the clock, and wrote it on his clipboard. The other 2 looked at him, and then at me. I had stood up and started moving toward Dr. Clockwatcher. "You can't let him die," I yelled. "You're doctors. Do something." "Mr. Geist, there's really nothing we can do," one of the other doctors said to me. "Your father signed a DNR because he didn't want to be kept alive if he had to live off a machine." "I know about the damn DNR," I shouted, anger rising in me. "But you can save his life. Don't let him die. He's my father." "I'm sorry," Dr. Timecaller started again. I might have been able to contain myself if he hadn't put a hand on my shoulder while he started talking. But he did. I reached back to punch him in the face. The scene went black as soon as my fist made contact. The scene stayed dark for what seemed like a long time. I knew where I was, though. Before I saw anything, before I heard a single word, the smell of cologne invaded my nostrils, lingering there unpleasantly. I wondered briefly if Detective Hall wore so much cologne because he was intentionally covering up something worse. "Did you do something to your wife?" he asked me as he became visible in front of me, sitting on the other side of an interview table at the police station. I stared at him briefly, the question not fully penetrating my brain. He can't have just asked me that question. He can't have just asked me if I had hurt the one person left I truly loved. "She's my wife," I told him, as if this explained everything. When he didn't answer, I elaborated. "Of course I didn't do anything to her. I love her." "I have found in all my years of investigating violent crimes," Hall said, speaking slowly to sound more dramatic, "when something like this happens, it is almost always the husband. It's almost always the boyfriend. It's almost always the spouse, the partner, the lover." "This case will have to be the exception," I told him. "I wouldn't even be capable of doing anything to Becky. I would give my life for her. If you have nothing else, I'll be on my way. I trust I'll hear from you if you learn anything about what has happened." "Oh no," Detective Hall said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "We are far from done here. We have lots of games left to play." While he was speaking, I started smelling the aroma of a campfire, and flames erupted where Hall was sitting. It hadn't happened like this. I must be in the middle of a transition. The scene never faded to black this time. It transitioned directly into the next scene. In just a few seconds, I was sitting around a campfire with Eddie and Gary, my 2 best friends. A body had not been found, but Becky had been declared dead. We all had beers in our hand, and we were taking turns sharing our favorite memories of Becky. Guys, I said, after Gary got done telling a story, I'd gotta disappear into the woods for a few minutes. It's because of all that beer, Jack, Eddie told me. He was always great at figuring things like that out. I walked far enough into the woods that I was sure they couldn't see me. I leaned against a tree and pulled the handgun from my pocket. I stared at it in my hand for a few minutes. I couldn't spend too much time on this, because the guys would start getting suspicious and come looking for me. I didn't want it to come to this, but with my father gone and now Becky, I didn't have the will to keep going. I put the gun to my head. "Don't," I heard a low voice say from somewhere through the trees. "There are options available to you, Jack. I can help." I looked around for the owner of the voice, but I saw nothing. "Unless you can tell me where my wife is, then just stop," I said to the nothingness in front of me. "There's nothing else you can do for me." "I can't tell you how to find her," the voice said as a man materialized in front of me. "But I can help you see it for yourself. Give me a chance, Jack Geist. You have nothing to lose." The man now standing before me was wearing a black mask and black robes. I could see nothing of his face and little of his body. He was thin. Something seemed off about him, but he was right about one thing. I had nothing to lose. "Do you know where my wife is or not?" I asked him. He made me think perhaps she was still alive, when I had been giving up hope on that every day. "No," he admitted. There was a long pause while he seemed to be thinking. After a long moment of silence, he said, "But you do. I can give you the tools to find her. Will you let me help you?" Before I had a chance to answer, he raised one hand and touched it to my forehead. An intense pain shot through my whole body, starting at the point his hand was touching. It was a white-hot pain, and it reached everywhere, slowly knocking me off my feet. Then I heard his voice. His mouth wasn't moving, but I could hear his voice, and I could tell he was speaking directly to me. "You will continue on in the spirit of the Halloween season. Halloween night. You will wake with abilities you need to complete your desired task. But be warned, Jack Geist, for with abilities come power, and with power comes temptation. You must be wise in your choices, because tonight I am either saving your life or beginning its final chapter. Your fate is now in your hands." As he spoke, the pain intensified until it was almost unbearable. When he spoke the last word, he released his hand from my head, and I fell to the ground. I didn't have the strength to get back up. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the masked man looking down at me and saying, "Sleep well, Jack Geist." I woke up in a small room, laying on a bed in the dark. A dim light came on when I started moving around. I tried to take in my surroundings, but there wasn't much in the room other than the bed I woke up on. I walked to the door and opened it. I was relatively surprised to find that it was unlocked. I walked into a narrow hallway that seemed to be completely deserted. Needing to find out where I was, I opened the first door I came to. It was also unlocked. In the room, there was nothing except a large cabinet standing right in the center of the floor. A sign on the cabinet warned, "Danger, do not open." Curiosity surged through me. I had to know what was in the cabinet. I had just woken up in a strange place wearing weird clothes. I had just noticed my clothes, and my mind obsessed over finding out what was in that cabinet. I was wearing an orange shirt with the face of a carved pumpkin on it. Black gloves on my hands exactly matched my black pants. A maroon cape completed the ensemble by not matching, but somehow bringing the outfit together. I looked ridiculous. I stepped toward the cabinet, knowing I shouldn't open it, but determined to do it anyway. A slight twinge of pain ran through my arm as my hand touched the handle. I pulled slowly, and a sense of power lifted my spirits. It didn't matter what the sign said. I was going to open this cabinet. Before I had pulled the door all the way open, it swung out fast and hit me in the face. A shadow flew out of it, but nothing was there that should have cast the shadow. Being startled, I jumped. But I didn't come back down. I went clear to the ceiling and hit my head on the light bulb that illuminated the room. The bulb shattered, casting the room into darkness. I had only just realized I was hovering when surprise took over and I fell to the floor. There was another man in the room with me. He must have been the one throwing the shadow, but I didn't see him in the cabinet. Could he have jumped out of the cabinet without me seeing? He stood perfectly still, and my eyes were fixed on him. I couldn't see anything more than the outline of his body because it was so dark in the room. The very small amount of light coming into the room was coming through a window on the wall opposite the door. Before I could take in what was happening, the window broke and the other man was gone. There was blood on the glass where it had scraped him. I walked over to the window and examined the glass. When I looked out the window, I realized we were 20 floors in the air. Could he fly? Had I been flying when I broke the light bulb? Or had he just ended his life? I stepped back from the window and jumped into the air again. Yet again, I remained in the air. In an attempt to move forward, I threw my arms in front of me. It did nothing. I remained suspended in one spot. Just as I thought to myself, I really need to know how to move forward, I felt my body jerk in that direction. It must be controlled by thought. I worked on moving side to side, and got to where I was at least decent at controlling my flying. Then I headed back for the window. I navigated my way out the window, careful not to cut myself on the broken glass where the other man had escaped. When I was outside, I could see him floating in the air. He was wearing all black and a black cape, but I could see nothing more because he was obscured by a thick smoke. Before I could move toward him, he started speaking. "You have wronged me," he said in a voice that was not quite human, somehow slightly mechanical. I started feeling a little dizzy being so far up in the air with nothing below me. "I don't even know you," I replied, "but if you need help, I'd—" "Because of this," he said, appearing not to have heard me at all. "I have no choice but to bring upon you the same hurt I have felt." "We can talk about this, mister," I told him. He still appeared to not have heard me. He pointed his arms toward a small shed on the ground, and a fire erupted around it. I couldn't figure out how that happened. Surely he hadn't caused that from way up here. The flame quickly engulfed the whole building. A moment later, and with no warning, the shed exploded, taking out part of the ground floor from the tower I had just flown out of, and knocking the building off balance. I flew away from the building at first, because for a minute I thought it was going to tip right over. When I realized this wasn't going to happen, I knew I had to try to save as many people as possible from the building. One at a time, I had got about 14 people safely to the ground. I came across a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4, wearing a purple coat and a blue hat. She was overcome by panic trying to find her mommy. "I'm going to get you to safety," I told her. "Then I'll come back and find your mommy. What's your name?" Lucy, she said, relaxing for just a moment. Then she started crying again. I flew her to safety, and didn't really want to leave her alone. I had to go back to the building, though. I flew back and found a crowd gathered at the window of a higher floor than the one I had saved the girl from. "Stop rescuing them," I heard the mechanical voice yell. I turned around to see him floating about 100 yards away. His face was emitting a strange glow so bright that I couldn't make out what he looked like. "This is not your fight." It was my fight, though. He must have been in the cabinet I opened, the one I had been warned not to open. I had opened it anyway, and now this was happening. I was responsible for stopping this. I flew toward him, but he darted away before I got close enough to fight him. I flew back toward the building in time to see it rock one good time and drop a metal rod from its top. The man in black clothes happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I saw him get hit by a metal rod. He fell with it, and I watched him descend into the fire below. Now I was free to go back to the people in the tower. I flew back up to where I had seen the group of people and began reassuring them that I was here to help. "Have you seen my daughter?" one lady yelled. "She was wearing a blue hat. I need to know my daughter is okay." Before I could answer, the building shook again, sending 3 people falling. One of them was the lady looking for her daughter. I dived toward the ground, but I couldn't get to her in time. She reached the ground just before I did, and she was dead when I landed. I took her hand and held it in mine, tears now streaming from my eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said. My vision was blurry from the tears, and I reached up to wipe my eyes. When I could see again, I found myself in a strange waiting room I didn't recognize. I was still holding the lady's hand, but she was sitting in a chair, and she was also awake. "It's all right, Pumpkin Man," she said, as if in response to my sad apology. "You're trying to do something good, and that's not easy. Keep doing it. I need to know about my daughter. She was wearing a blue hat." "She's safe," I told her. "She's alive, and she's safe." "I am so thankful for that," she said. "You have to go back. You're the only one who can stop him." "I don't understand. You look just like him," she said, as if in explanation. Only this didn't explain anything. Before I could question her further, I was overcome by dizziness, and I was thrown back into the dark scene that felt more like reality. I was still holding the dead woman's hand. I flew back up toward the top of the building to see how many people were left. By this time, choppers had come in and were taking larger numbers of people at a time. In the distance, I saw a black cape floating through the air. That wasn't possible. It couldn't possibly be him, because I had watched him die. I flew toward the cape. The man now in the air with a black cape took off, and I chased him. I followed him to the top of a water tower, where he stood with his back to me. I waited for several long minutes, waiting for him to speak first. He finally did. "What do you want from me?" he asked, in his mechanical voice, not turning around. "I want to know why you're doing this," I told him. "I want to help you." "I'm doing this because they deserve it," he shouted. "You don't want to help me. Nobody wants to help me. The world has turned against me, and you should know that better than anyone." He turned around, and shock almost knocked me over. The woman who had died said I looked just like him. I expected to see similar features, maybe the same body type. I did not expect to be looking at an exact replica of myself. I could have been looking in a mirror. "What is this?" I asked him, grabbing him by the shirt and lifting him into the air with amazing ease. Adrenaline is a powerful thing. "What does it look like, Pumpkin Man?" I threw him to the ground and punched him in the face. He knew what it looked like. It looked like he was using my face to terrorize the city so I would get the blame for it. I was not the type of person to just let that continue. I kicked him in the chest. He started laughing. I had kicked him in the chest and the son of a bitch was laughing. What kind of sick freak was he? I thought of throwing him from the tower, but it wouldn't do any good. He would catch himself mid-fall and fly away. "Go ahead and kill me, then," he said, his mechanical voice sounding slightly strained. There was still a smile on his face as he pulled a large knife from his back pocket and handed it to me. This didn't make any sense, but I wasn't going to question too much if he was going to help me. Once I had the knife, he laid back and spread his arms out, giving me easy access to his chest. I held the knife in the air for a minute before bringing it down at full speed, plunging it into his heart. Black liquid oozed from where the knife made contact. It smelled like blood, and it felt like blood. But it was completely black. I pulled the knife out and stabbed again just to make sure he was dead and not seriously wounded. Once I was certain he was dead, I laid the knife down on top of the water tower and proceeded to start lifting his corpse. It was a little on the heavy side, but I was able to throw it over my shoulder and fly back toward the crowd of people with it. When I got to the safe spot where the choppers were dropping off the last of the people from the building, I laid the corpse down where everyone could see it. I flew away again as they started cheering. I caught a glimpse of the little girl in the purple coat and the blue hat as I flew away. Lucy was never going to see her mother again. Because of me, Lucy was never going to see her mother again. I had unleashed the man who had done all that damage, and I had no idea how many lives had been lost. Because of this, I knew I had to go into hiding. This Pumpkin Man, as I had been called, must go into hiding and not ever come out again. I was still just Jack Geist, no different than anyone else. As I flew through the air, I could see people pointing at me. I was sure they all wondered where I had come from, and they were congratulating me on taking down the bad man. They were doing this because they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know everything that had just happened. They might not ever know, because they would never see the Pumpkin Man again. "He's waking up," I heard someone yelling. That didn't make any sense, this high up in the air. Was there someone else up here? It was plausible, after I had just fought with the unnamed Dark Man. I tried to stop and turn around, but I found myself incapable of doing that. All I could do was fly forward. Had that been Ari's voice? "I've never seen anything like this happen before," a male voice said. "I don't know what to do." I was still trying to alter my flight, but my body continued to take me where it was already going. "Get him out of the film, for starters," the first voice said. She was panicky. I felt 3 pricks in my neck, and the scene around me became less clear with each one. After the third one, I felt like I was falling a great distance, and suddenly I found myself back in the screening room at Mortem House. Ari, Edward, Theo, and Susan were all gathered around watching me. Some of them were watching from the hall, because the room was so tight on space. "What's going on?" I asked. "Your vital signs are stabilizing," Susan told me. "According to our information, you should have been too far gone, but you are waking up. It doesn't make any sense, but we have to get you out of here." "How?" "Close your eyes," Ari told me. She put a hand on my head, and I felt like I was drowning. I closed my eyes, and suddenly felt as though I was being pushed on from all sides. I thought I was going to explode as the pressure became worse and worse. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, it just stopped. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the abandoned hospital. 3 people were around the bed I was still strapped to, but none of them were Alex or Corbin. There was a short man in a tall hat and a white coat, a thin man with big eyes, and what appeared to be a giant baby. I recognized 2 of them. Big Baby might not have intentionally done so, but he had helped me escape the Pretius house. The other man I recognized was Vince Pretius. He was standing on my left side and looking down at me. "Hello, Mr. O'Lantern," Vince said after a minute. "For a moment I was afraid we had not arrived in time." Turning to the man in the white hat and coat, who bore a strange resemblance to a lawn ornament, he said, "He is alive." "What are you all doing here?" I asked, confused. I was becoming more anxious with every passing second. I looked around at each of them. Vince's face was impossible to read. The man with the hat looked strangely excited, and Baby's face showed concern but not real understanding. Looking at his hands, I saw brown smears on them that I had the unpleasant feeling had probably originated in his diaper. "We're here to rescue you, Pumpkin Man," Baby said as he moved closer to the bed. "That is correct," Vince confirmed. "Come with us, Mr. O'Lantern. Your story doesn't end here. Not today. To be